friends, and welcome to today's video. So today we're going to be doing a little experiment. Me trying out 3 different types of cold brew, or 3 different brewing methods for cold brew. Figure out which one is the best, the worst, or what just their differences are. I haven't done this experiment before, so I am just overall interested to see what will happen. So our 3 different brewing methods are going to be brewing the cold brew in the cold, so in the refrigerator. This is my go-to method with cold brew. I feel it gives the cold brew a really crisp but still full flavor and mouthfeel. The next option is brewing it at room temperature. Now, I know some people do this. These are basically the 2 ways to do cold brew, either in the fridge or at room temperature. And the main difference is, from my experience, I'm not entirely sure, I haven't compared them side by side, but just like in making them in different coffee shops, when you brew it at room temperature, it tends to be a little bit muddier, a little bit more thick. So it just kind of depends on your preference there. Also, that's more ideal for a cold brew concentrate, which is what you make when making cold brew. You can of course do some ratio like 1:20 or 1:18 when you're making cold brew and not making a concentrate, but most everyone, and especially in coffee shops, you make a concentrate and then you cut the concentrate when you're making your drinks. And my third method is a hot bloom cold brew. So I actually just saw a TikTok about this, and that's kind of what inspired this video. Somebody did a hot bloom on their cold brew and then they stuck it in the fridge, and according to them, it brought out more floral, fruity flavors in the coffee, which is what I love in my coffee. I love the fruity, floral flavors that you can get through like single origin or just really specialty coffees. So I'm really excited to try that one out. In that one, we are going to be ultimately brewing it in the refrigerator, just because I'm most familiar with brewing it in the cold, so that's sort of my like control for the experiment. So yeah. Anyways, I have all of my jars prepped with 30 grams of coarsely ground coffee. I'm using the switchback from Caravan Coffee today. This is a blend and it's super fruity. It has really good citrus notes, and it is one of my favorite coffees right now. I'm not normally a blend person, but this coffee, I don't know, there's just something about it. It's so special. So we're gonna be using that mostly because we want to see if those fruity floral notes come out with the hot bloom method, because you don't really get the full potential that the notes of the coffee beans are when you're doing cold brews. So yeah, and then we are going to be doing a 1:10 ratio today. So we're gonna do, it's 30 grams of beans like I already said, and then 300 grams of water. This is all just preference. I think a 1:10 ratio is a good middle ground. I feel like a 1:4 is just like too concentrated. So I do a 1:10. So we are going to start out with our cold brew. So I have all of my jars labeled, and I already have this measured in. You just dump in your 300 grams of water, and then we're gonna stick this bad boy in the fridge. The next brew method is the room temperature. Once again, it's labeled and it's the exact same thing. My 300 grams of water measured out. And then we are going to close this up and just set this on top of the fridge and let that sit. Now for the hot bloom. So I've decided I'm going to do an 100 gram hot bloom and then 200 grams of cold water and then stick it in the fridge. Sort of the reasoning for the hot bloom and why I think, other than the person saying that it's going to make it more fruity and floral, is when you bloom your coffee, it lets out gases and a chemical reaction happens. And then when you add the more water, those notes start to show up more. So I think doing a third of the water in the hot bloom is a good ratio for that. So I'm gonna turn on my kettle and wait a few minutes, and then we'll do that. Okay, so now that my water is at a boil, we are gonna do an 100-gram hot brew right into this jar. Okay, so all I did there, I just poured in circular motions, and then I just gave it a good swirl because I didn't completely coat all the beans because 100 grams wasn't quite enough time to get it all saturated. We're just gonna wait about a minute, and then we will add the rest of our water. And yeah, I can really tell that this is bubbling up and releasing those gases, which is awesome and what we want to happen. So yeah, now that it's been enough time for that bloom to happen, we're just gonna add 200 grams of cold water. Okay, and that's it. We're just gonna close this up and stick it in the fridge. And the ideal time for cold brew to brew is 20 to 24 hours. So I'm gonna aim for 22 hours, but I'll be back tomorrow and we'll test out all the cold brews as concentrates, as you know, cut equal parts, and then as my favorite drink, which is just half cold brew, half oat milk. It's my favorite drink right now. So yeah, well, okay, so it's the next day. Actually, it's not really the next day. I did strain these on the next day, but it's been a few days. But either way, so we have all of our cold brews. We have the one that was brewed in the cold, the hot brew, and the one that was brewed at room temperature. They've all been sitting in the refrigerator, so now they're all cold. But that won't affect the room temperature one because it brewed completely at room temperature. So yeah, let's get to trying them. I have 3 cups of ice right here. And I'm just gonna pour a decent amount of each of them into their respective glasses. And so I remember which one is which. I'm going to like put them on top of their thing. Okay, so first we'll start with trying the room temperature. Overall, it's really good cold brew. It's really clean, and yeah, I don't know how it compares to the other ones yet. There's really nice kind of caramely notes to it. Kind of what you'd expect from a cold brew concentrate. Now let's go to the cold one, and then we're gonna do the hot bloom last. Okay, so the cold one is not as intense of a flavor as the room temperature, which makes sense. The room temperature, the hotter the coffee, like the water is going to be, the more flavor you're going to get out of it. So since the water sitting at room temperature was definitely warmer than this water sitting in the fridge, it makes sense that this one's a little bit more flavorful, but this one is also a little bit cleaner. I thought this was really clean, but tasting that side to side, I can tell that there is a little bit of a muddiness to this one. It's still really clean, but there is a little bit more like, I don't even know. It's hard to explain, but like just kind of like a muddiness. And this one still has those like kind of caramely notes. So let's try the hot bloom cold brew, which this one was brewed in the fridge. but we bloomed it with hot water. Oh wow, this one is way different. Those floral notes really come through in the hot bloom cold brew. Yeah, you can still kind of tell the caramel note is there, but it's more floral and fruity. Let's see if I still go back to coffee. Yeah, so I did this with the switchback, which the notes that it states on here, it says has vibrant citrus, dynamic, and sweet fruits. And I can totally tell those sweet fruits and citrus are really coming forward. And I also feel like there is like a floral note coming out in this as well. Okay, so now we're gonna try them cut with water, which is how people would normally drink them. The main reason for testing this is to see if watering it down does anything, especially to this one, which was not as strong, if it makes this one a little bit more mellow. And then this is just a wild card because I really like it. So let's start with the room temperature again. Okay, yeah, I mean, that definitely cut it back. It needed a little bit more like the cold brew cold, like the one that was brewed in the cold. But it still has that sort of thick muddiness to it. Now for the one that was brewed in the cold. Okay, so this one kind of just seems like water now. I brewed these all for 22 hours. So if I were to brew this in the cold again, I would go for more like 24 to 26 hours to get a little bit more flavor out of those beans. Now let's go for the hot bloom. Yeah, this one kind of the same thing as I did, brew it in the cold. Adding the water does just, it takes away some of those really dynamic flavors that I was talking about. So I would again brew it for a little bit longer, 24 to 26 hours instead of the 20 to 22 range, but still really delicious. This one definitely has more flavor than the regular one because we did add that heat at the beginning. Okay, and lastly, because we just need to try this all of the ways we can, I am going to add some oat milk to all of them. This is how I drink my coffee. I do half cold brew, normally cold brew concentrate, but it's gonna be okay, and then half oat milk, and sometimes add a little bit of syrup, but I'm not gonna add syrup today. And I'm not gonna do half oat milk right now, I'm just gonna add a little bit. So this oat milk is kind of weird. It's the Elmhurst brand, the barista one. It's okay, but it's not my favorite. But I was trying out a new oat milk. So once again, start with room temperature. Okay, at this point I'm just adding a lot of stuff to the coffee, but it's starting to, it has that little bit of oat milk creamy taste, and it's still good. You can still tell the flavors over it. And this is comparable to, adding cream, so you can still taste the cold brew over the little bit of oat milk I added. So, pretty good. Okay, yeah, this one is just kind of tasting like watered down oat milk. I'm less impressed by the cold than I thought. That's how I kind of thought cold brew should be made, and I do still think it's how it should be made, but it just, like, sometimes it just depends on the situation, but you need to brew it for longer than I did, clearly. Now let's go for the hot bloom, which is my favorite, surprisingly. Okay, this is the most flavorful now that I added the oat milk. I don't know why, but that just like added more like base for those really vibrant floral fruity notes to come through. I really like this hot bloom cold brew thing. Okay, so my final verdict is that the hot bloom cold brew is so good. I don't think it's practical to do that in a coffee shop. I mean, you're making so much cold brew at a time. At the place I work, we make like 4 gallons of cold brew at a time in this big toddy maker. And there we actually make it in the cold, but we do it for longer. We do it for like 24 to 26 hours, and that cold brew is phenomenal. So that's that. But yeah, I don't think the hot bloom is practical in that sense because you have to make so much at a time since it is such a time intensive thing. So, but for home, I highly recommend, especially if you like more floral fruity notes in your coffee, because that's what I really like and it's so good. Now for the room temperature versus cold, it's kind of interesting because with brewing them for 24 hours, I definitely like this room temperature one more. It's more flavorful. It, you know, it does have that little bit of muddiness to it, which isn't my favorite thing in the world, but for making such a small batch and brewing it for less time, it turned out really good. Whereas the cold, in this experiment, the cold turned out way worse than the room temperature. But I do stand by, if you want it to be a little bit cleaner, just brewing it for like 24, 26 hours, the cold is gonna be your best friend. So it just kind of depends on what you want, but oh my god, the hot bloom was so good. Okay, anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned something, because I certainly did, and I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye!